Commander Alice Boyd couldn't stop her hands from shaking as she stared at the massive alien ship through the bridge's main viewport. The vessel hung in space like a twisted knife, its dark metal surface absorbing the light from nearby stars. The research vessel she commanded, the Dawn Explorer, had been monitoring unusual energy signatures near Neptune when the alien ship appeared. "Commander, they're broadcasting again," Lieutenant Ryan Peters said from his communication station, his voice steady despite the fear evident in his eyes. "Same frequency as before." Alice took a deep breath and nodded. "Put them through." The bridge's speakers crackled to life, and a harsh, clicking voice filled the air. The universal translator they'd been gifted during first contact 30 hours ago converted the alien language into English. "This is Supreme Commander Zextal of the Zarkax Empire. Your species has been given sufficient time to consider our generous offer. What is your answer?" Alice looked at the small hologram showing Admiral Frank White back on Earth. The old man's face was grim, but his voice never wavered. "Tell them our answer, Commander Boyd." She straightened her uniform and pressed the broadcast button. "Supreme Commander, I speak on behalf of the United Earth Government. We appreciate your offer, but Earth and its colonies will not surrender their sovereignty. We are open to peaceful diplomatic relations and cultural exchange, but we will not submit to foreign rule." The silence that followed lasted only 10 seconds, but to Alice, it felt like hours. "Your species' pride will be your undoing," Zextal's voice returned, colder than before. "You have seen our technological superiority. Your primitive vessels can barely reach your system's outer planets. We control galaxies. This is your final warning. Surrender or face extinction." Admiral White's hologram spoke up. "Commander Boyd, maintain your position. Do not engage. I repeat, do not." A brilliant purple beam lanced out from the Zarkax ship, passing harmlessly by the Dawn Explorer. Alice's heart stopped as she realized its trajectory. "No," she whispered. The beam struck Luna City, Earth's largest lunar colony. The settlement, home to 50,000 people, exploded in a flash of light that temporarily blinded the ship's sensors. When the glare faded, a massive crater remained where the colony had stood. "Oh God!" Someone on the bridge sobbed. The Zarkax ship fired again. This time, Armstrong Colony on the lunar far side vanished in another purple flash. 2 more shots destroyed the remaining lunar settlements. 200,000 lives. Alice's first officer, Commander Peter Walsh, said quietly. "Gone in seconds." The alien voice returned. "This demonstration was merely a fraction of our power. You have 24 Earth hours to surrender your planet and all its remaining colonies. If you refuse, we will begin systematic elimination of your species." The transmission cut off. Alice stared at the massive ship, her mind racing through everything she'd learned about the Zarkax in the past day. Their faster-than-light technology, their energy weapons, their vast empire spanning multiple galaxies. Everything pointed to humanity's inevitable defeat. "Commander," Lieutenant Peters called out, his voice shaking. "We're receiving thousands of emergency signals from Earth. Every military force is being mobilized. The United Earth Defense Council is convening an emergency session." Alice nodded, her training taking over despite the horror she'd just witnessed. "Send all our sensor data to Earth Command. They need to know exactly what we're up against." The next 20 hours passed in a blur of activity. The Dawn Explorer maintained its position, monitoring the Zarkax ship while more alien vessels arrived. Each one was larger than the last, taking up positions around Earth's orbital paths. During a brief rest period, Alice found herself in her quarters, staring at a photo of Earth taken from Mars. The beautiful blue marble looked so peaceful, so unaware of the danger it faced. Her computer terminal beeped, signaling a private transmission from Earth. Dr. Robert Nash's face appeared on her screen. The physicist had been her roommate in college, and now he worked on classified projects she wasn't allowed to know about. "Alice," he said, his eyes red from lack of sleep, I need you to send me everything you have on their propulsion systems. Every sensor reading, every energy signature, everything. Robert, what's going on? The data is classified. I've got clearance from the Defense Council. He interrupted, sending her his authorization codes. Alice, I think I found something. They're faster than light travel. It's not what we thought. They're not bending space. They're going somewhere else entirely. If I'm right. He paused, running a hand through his messy hair. If I'm right, we might have a chance. But I need that data. Alice verified his codes and transmitted the information. What do you mean, somewhere else? I can't say more. But Alice, he leaned closer to the camera. Whatever happens in the next few hours, remember this. Humanity is more capable than they think. We've survived ice ages, plagues, and our own destructive nature. We'll survive this too. The transmission ended, leaving Alice alone with her thoughts. 3 hours before the Zarkak's deadline, Alice received new orders. The Dawn Explorer was to fall back to Earth orbit and join the pathetic defense fleet, a collection of retrofitted civilian ships and the few military vessels humanity had managed to build for space combat. As they approached Earth, Alice watched more Zarkak ships arrive. They numbered in the hundreds now, their dark hulls blotting out the stars. All hands to battle stations, she ordered, knowing it was futile. Their weapons would barely scratch the alien ship's paint. The deadline arrived. But instead of opening fire, the Zarkaks broadcast to every communication device on Earth and in space. Supreme Commander Zextal's image appeared on screens worldwide. Your time has expired, he announced. Yet we detect no signs of surrender. Your species' stupidity is remarkable. Before we begin your extinction, know this. Your deaths will serve as a warning to others who would defy the Empire. Take comfort in knowing your end will serve a greater purpose. The alien ships moved into attack formation. Alice gripped her command chair's armrests, preparing for the end. Then Dr. Nash's voice came through her private channel. Alice, when everything goes to hell, remember, we're still here. Humanity doesn't need to match their technology. We just need to survive long enough to develop our own. Keep fighting. Keep watching. Keep. The transmission cut off as the first Zarkak ship opened fire. The battle for Earth had begun, and humanity's only hope lay in a half-formed theory from a sleepless physicist who saw something impossible in the enemy's wake. Alice Boyd squared her shoulders and began issuing orders. If humanity was going down, they'd go down fighting. But as she watched the alien ships move through space, she kept thinking about Nash's words. They weren't bending space. They were going somewhere else entirely. Somewhere else. The Dawn Explorer shuddered as another Zarkak's beam passed nearby, and Alice pushed the thoughts aside. She had a crew to protect and a planet to defend, even if victory seemed impossible. But deep in secure bunkers beneath the Earth's surface, Dr. Robert Nash and his team were already beginning their work. The next 15 years would change everything, though none of the humans fighting in space that day could have imagined just how humanity would eventually turn the tables on their would-be conquerors. Dr. Robert Nash hadn't slept properly in 3 months. Dark circles hung under his eyes as he stared at the test chamber through thick, reinforced glass. Behind him, Admiral Kate Morrison watched with her arms crossed, her military uniform crisp despite the late hour. "Show me again," she ordered. Nash nodded and pressed a button. Inside the chamber, a small metal sphere began to glow. The air around it twisted, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Then something impossible happened. Reality itself seemed to tear open. The hole wasn't black. It wasn't any color at all. Looking at it made the observers' eyes hurt and their minds spin. Several technicians turned away, fighting back nausea. 15 seconds. Nash counted, his voice tight with concentration. That's 3 seconds longer than last time. The sphere vanished into the hole, which snapped shut with a sound that made everyone's teeth ache. A moment later, the sphere reappeared on the other side of the chamber, smoking slightly. Temperature is stable, called out Linda Martinez, Nash's lead engineer. Structure is intact. But she frowned at her readings. The atomic clock inside is off by 6 hours. Admiral Morrison stepped closer to the glass. You're bending time. No, Nash replied, rubbing his tired eyes. We're going somewhere else. The Zarkak ships weren't using advanced propulsion. They were cutting through to another dimension. I saw it in their engine signatures during the first attack. We're just taking a different route to the same place. A different route that drives people insane, Morrison said flatly. She wasn't exaggerating. The first human test pilot who tried to follow a probe into what they now called horror space had returned babbling about impossible geometries and colors that shouldn't exist. The second pilot hadn't returned at all. We're making progress, Nash insisted. The new shielding Linda developed blocks 90% of the psychological effects, and the time difference is getting smaller. Soon we'll. An alarm blared, cutting him off. Red lights flashed as security doors slammed shut. Containment breach. Linda shouted. The sphere, it's leaking something. Nash rushed to his console. The metal sphere, still smoking, was now oozing a substance that didn't reflect light properly. Whatever it was began eating through the chamber floor. Purge the chamber, Morrison ordered. Now. Nash slammed his hand down on the emergency purge button. Jets of specialized foam filled the chamber, designed to neutralize anything that might leak back from horror space. The strange substance sizzled and vanished. That's the third breach this month, Morrison said quietly after the all-clear sounded. The Joint Chiefs are getting nervous, Robert. It's been 5 years since the Zarkak's attack. They've destroyed 3 more colonies since then. We need results. Nash turned to face her. Kate, I know what this is costing us, but we're dealing with physics that shouldn't be possible. The Zarkaks had centuries to perfect their method. We're trying to catch up in a decade. Morrison's face softened slightly. She'd known Nash since before the attack, when she'd been a captain and he'd been giving lectures about theoretical physics to Navy officers. They'd both lost people when the lunar colonies were destroyed. Her wife had been a doctor at Armstrong Colony. How long? She asked. Give me 6 months to perfect the shielding. Then we can start testing with larger objects. Maybe even a small ship. Morrison nodded slowly. I'll talk to the chiefs. But Robert. She gestured at the chamber. Whatever leaked through just ate through 6 inches of reinforced steel in seconds. If we can't control this, we'll control it, Nash promised. We have to. The next 4 months passed in a blur of experiments, breakthroughs, and setbacks. Nash's team worked around the clock, testing different materials and energy configurations. Linda Martinez barely left the lab, determined to solve the shielding problem that had claimed 2 pilots' lives. They made progress. Each test lasted longer. The time differences grew smaller. The mysterious leaks became less frequent, but the psychological effects remained their biggest challenge. The human mind isn't meant to perceive that place, Nash explained during one briefing. It's like trying to make a 2-dimensional being understand 3-dimensional space. Our brains can't process what they're seeing. But they kept working. Earth had no choice. The Zarkak's blockade remained in place, their ships appearing randomly to destroy human vessels and colonies. Humanity needed a way to fight back. 6 months stretched to 8, then 10. Morrison protected the project from budget cuts and politicians who wanted faster results. Nash's hair turned gray, and dark dreams haunted his sleep. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Paul Wright, a young engineer who joined the project fresh out of college, noticed something in the sensor logs. The human pilots went crazy because they were trying to understand what they were seeing, he told Nash one late night. But what if we don't try to understand it? What if we just accept it? Nash frowned. What do you mean? Look at these brainwave patterns, Paul said, pulling up 2 sets of data. This is Pilot Chen when she encountered horror space. Total mental breakdown. But this, he pointed to the second set. This is from someone in deep meditation. The patterns are similar, but reversed. What if we train our pilots to empty their minds instead of trying to comprehend what they're seeing? Nash stared at the data. Get Linda, he said finally. I think you're onto something. They modified the shielding to create a kind of mental buffer zone. Instead of trying to block horror space's effects completely, they designed it to help the mind disconnect from what it was experiencing. The first test with the new system came 3 weeks later. The pilot was Susan Baker, a Navy officer with experience in meditation techniques. She sat in a small pod, surrounded by the new shielding, as Nash and Morrison watched anxiously. Beginning horror space insertion, Nash announced. The air twisted. The impossible hole appeared. Susan's pod vanished into it. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. The pod reappeared on the other side of the chamber. Susan's voice came through clearly on the radio. That was interesting. Permission to try again. Nash and Morrison shared a look of relief and triumph. After nearly 6 years of work, they'd done it. Humans could now travel through horror space and return safely. We can start scaling up, Nash told Morrison later that day. Build bigger ships, train more pilots. We'll need at least 5 years to construct a fleet in secret. But you have 3, Morrison interrupted. Intelligence reports suggest the Zarkax are planning something big, a full-scale invasion. She handed him a tablet showing troop movements and fleet deployments. We need ships ready before that happens. Nash looked at the data, then at the chamber where they'd finally succeeded. 3 years, he repeated. We'll need help. Lots of help. Morrison smiled grimly. Every major nation is already on board. We're building shipyards in asteroid belts, hidden lunar facilities, anywhere the Zarkax won't think to look. You just make sure the horror space drives work. Nash nodded. The hardest part of their work was done. Now they just had to build a fleet capable of using it. As he walked back to his lab, he thought about Alice Boyd, the commander who'd first noticed something strange about Zarkax ships during that terrible first contact. She was still out there, commanding a patrol ship, fighting the occasional skirmish with alien forces. Soon, he thought, she'd see what they'd accomplished. Soon, humanity would show the Zarkax that they'd made a terrible mistake in underestimating Earth. But first, they had a fleet to build, and only 3 years to do it. Project Director Stephen Hall stood in the vacuum of space, his magnetic boots locked onto the surface of Asteroid Base Alpha. Through his helmet's visor, he watched another massive hull section float silently into place. Construction drones swarmed around it like busy bees, their welding lights flashing in the darkness. Beautiful, isn't it? Linda Martinez's voice came through his radio. She floated nearby, her spacesuit marked with the red stripes of the engineering division. Hard to believe we've built 30 ships already. With 170 more to go, Steve replied. How are the horror space drives holding up? Better than expected. Paul's new containment design is working perfectly. No leaks in the last 6 tests. They watched as the drones finished securing the hull section. The ship taking shape before them would be called the Defiant, though that name appeared nowhere in any official records. As far as the Zarkax knew, Earth was building simple defense platforms, nothing that could threaten their superiority. The truth was far different. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, 12 secret shipyards worked day and night. Each one built a different part of the horror space fleet. Only when the ships were nearly complete would they be brought together for final assembly. Steve's radio crackled. Director Hall, we need you in control. On my way. He turned to Linda. Keep an eye on those bow plates. Last batch had some stress problems during horror space tests. Inside the asteroid base, Steve quickly removed his suit and headed to the control center. The large room was carved directly into the rock, filled with screens showing various construction projects. Chief of Security Amy Woods waited for him, her face serious. We had another close call, she said without preamble. Zarkax patrol came within 10,000 kilometers of Shipyard 7. if their new sensor upgrades had been installed. Steve felt his stomach tighten. Did they spot anything? No. Captain Baker took her test ship out and played decoy. Made it look like she was mapping asteroids for mining. They bought it and moved on. He nodded. Susan Baker, their first successful horror space pilot, now commanded a small fleet of decoy ships. Their job was to make Earth's space activities look normal and harmless. "We need to speed up construction," Steve said, studying the progress charts. "Intelligence says we have less than 2 years before the Zarkax launch their invasion." "The workers are already pulling double shifts," Amy pointed out. "And the horror space shielding has to be installed perfectly." One mistake. She didn't need to finish. They'd lost an entire construction crew 3 months ago when a shield failed during testing. The horror space leak had twisted both metal and flesh in ways that still haunted Steve's dreams. His tablet beeped with an incoming message from Paul Wright. "Need you in Lab 4. New problem with the drive cores." Steve sighed. There was always a new problem. Lab 4 was actually an old cargo ship anchored to the asteroid. Inside, Paul had set up a testing facility for the horror space drives. The young engineer looked worried as Steve entered. "Look at this," Paul said, pointing to a drive core suspended in a containment field. The metal surface seemed to shift and move, like it wasn't quite solid. "The horror space exposure is getting worse. The cores are becoming unstable." Steve studied the readings. "How long until total failure?" "That's just it. They're not failing. They're adapting, changing. It's like the metal itself is learning how to exist in both spaces at once." "Is that good or bad?" Paul ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know. Dr. Nash thinks it might actually help. If the drives adapt to horror space, they might work better than our original designs. But we don't know what else might change," Steve finished. He'd learned to be cautious about anything involving horror space. Run a full analysis. "And Paul," he pointed at the shifting metal, "keep this quiet for now. The workers are scared enough already." The next few weeks brought more challenges. 3 ships had to be rebuilt when their frames showed signs of horror space contamination. A Zarkax patrol destroyed another Earth colony, killing thousands. And the drive cores kept changing. But there were successes too. The shield modifications Linda and Paul developed worked perfectly, protecting both ships and crews. The first full-size vessel, unofficially named the Nightshade, completed all its horror space trials without a single problem. And the new stealth systems kept the shipyards hidden from prying alien eyes. 1 month later, Steve stood with Linda and Paul in the Nightshade's engine room, watching the horror space drive pulse with strange energy. "The metal's completely stable now," Paul reported. "It's like it made peace with horror space. The efficiency rates are 30% better than our original designs." Linda nodded. "Same with the shields. They're not just blocking horror space effects anymore. They're channeling them, using them." "Should we be worried?" Steve asked. "About using technology we don't fully understand." "The Zarkax don't fully understand it either," Linda said. "That's why their ships stick to established horror space routes. They're afraid to experiment. But us," she smiled grimly, "we have nothing to lose." A message from Amy interrupted them. "Director Admiral Morrison is here for the inspection." Steve checked his tablet. The Admiral wasn't due for 3 more days. "Something's happened," he said. "Let's go find out what." They found Admiral Morrison in the control center, studying the construction schedules. She looked older than when Steve had last seen her, new lines of worry creasing her face. "The Zarkax have moved up their timetable," she said without greeting. "Intelligence intercepts suggest they'll begin their invasion in 8 months, not 2 years." The room fell silent. 8 months. They had less than 50 ships ready. "We need more time," Steve said. "We don't have it. Earth's defenses can't hold against a full invasion." Morrison turned to face them. "How many ships can we have ready in 6 months?" Steve quickly calculated. maybe 120, if we push the workers to their limits, if nothing goes wrong. Do it. I'll get you whatever resources you need. She paused. And Steve, the ships don't have to be perfect. They just have to be good enough to fight. After she left, Steve gathered his team leaders. They worked through the night, revising schedules, reassigning crews, finding ways to build ships faster without sacrificing safety. "We'll make it," Linda said as dawn approached. "Humans are good at impossible things." Steve looked out the window at the half-finished ships floating in space. Soon, they would carry humanity's hopes into battle. Soon, they would show the Zarkax that humanity had mastered the very thing that made them powerful. But first, they had to finish building them, and time was running out. In his office, Steve updated the construction schedule one more time. Then he recorded a message to Dr. Nash back on Earth. "The forge is burning hot, old friend. I hope your pilots are ready, because in 6 months, they'll have the biggest fleet humanity has ever built. Let's just hope it's enough." Intelligence Officer Daniel Cooper rubbed his tired eyes as he stared at his screen. For the past 3 months, he'd been monitoring Zarkax communications from a hidden base beneath the Pacific Ocean. What he saw tonight made his blood run cold. "Get me Admiral Morrison," he told his assistant. "Now." While waiting for the connection, Dan reviewed the decoded transmissions again. The Zarkax weren't even trying to hide their plans anymore. They were too confident in their superiority. Admiral Morrison's face appeared on his screen. "This better be important, Cooper." "It is, Mom. The Zarkax aren't just planning an invasion. They're planning to make Earth disappear." He sent her the translated documents. The alien empire had grown tired of Earth's continued resistance. They planned to use a new weapon, something that would remove Earth's entire solar system from normal space. Permanently. "How long?" Morrison asked. 3 weeks. Their fleet is already gathering beyond Pluto. Morrison's face hardened. "Our ships aren't ready. We needed at least another month." "There's more," Dan said. "Look at the fleet composition. Over 2,000 ships. Even if our horror space fleet was complete, he didn't need to finish. The original plan had called for 500 Earth ships. Now they would be outnumbered 4 to 1. "Send everything to Project Director Hall," Morrison ordered. "I'll inform the Defense Council." And Dan, "Good work. At least we won't be caught by surprise." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Dan's team intercepted more communications, building a clear picture of the coming attack. The Zarkax plan was simple but deadly. Surround Earth's solar system, activate their new weapon, and trap everything inside a bubble of twisted spacetime. In the asteroid belt, the shipyards worked at impossible speeds. Construction crews skipped sleep, racing to complete as many ships as possible. Horror space drive tests were cut short. Training times for crews were reduced. "We're taking risks," Steve Hall told Admiral Morrison during one update. "Big ones. Some of these ships haven't been properly tested. Better untested ships than no ships at all," Morrison replied. 10 days before the expected attack, Captain Susan Baker led the first multi-ship horror space jump. 5 vessels, including her flagship Nightshade, successfully navigated the impossible dimension and emerged exactly where planned. "The new drive cores worked perfectly," she reported. "They're adapting somehow. Learning. Each jump gets easier." The success gave everyone hope, but they needed more than hope to survive what was coming. 7 days before the attack, Dan Cooper made another discovery. "They're bringing their leaders to watch," he told Morrison. "The entire Zarkax High Command will be there to see Earth's destruction." "Pride comes before a fall," Morrison said quietly. Finally, 2 days before the projected attack date, Earth's fleet gathered in secret. 150 ships, built in hidden shipyards, crewed by volunteers who'd trained with technology that shouldn't exist. It wasn't the 500 they'd planned for, but it would have to be enough. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking at the tactical display. The Zarkak's fleet was visible now, even to normal sensors. They weren't trying to hide. "Status report," she ordered. "All ships report horror space drives functional." Her tactical officer responded. "Shield modifications are holding steady. Weapon systems are online." Morrison nodded. Earth's ships carried conventional weapons, but they'd been modified to work in conjunction with horror space technology. The results in testing had been interesting. "Message from Dr. Nash," her communications officer announced. "Final modifications to the fleet's horror space shields are complete. He says to give them hell." A small smile crossed Morrison's face. Then her tactical officer spoke again. "Admiral, massive energy readings from the Zarkak's fleet. They're beginning to move into position." "Earlier than expected," Morrison muttered. "Send word to all ships. Operation Nightmare begins in 6 hours." Throughout the fleet, crews made final preparations. Engineers ran last checks on horror space drives. Pilots reviewed their jump coordinates. Weapons officers calibrated their systems. On the Nightshade, Susan Baker addressed her crew. "What we're about to do has never been attempted. A coordinated horror space jump with 150 ships. When we emerge, we'll be facing an enemy that thinks they know everything about horror space travel. They're wrong." In his underground base, Dan Cooper and his team monitored Zarkak's communications. "They're still confident," he reported to Morrison. "They have no idea we've built this fleet. Their sensors are focused on Earth, not the asteroid belt." "Good," Morrison replied. "Let them keep watching Earth. They'll see us soon enough." 3 hours before the scheduled attack, the Zarkak's fleet reached their final positions. 2,000 ships arranged in a perfect sphere around Earth's solar system, preparing to trap it forever in twisted spacetime. "Message from Zarkak's command ship," Dan reported. They're broadcasting to Earth, to everyone." The alien transmission went to every screen, every radio, every communication device on Earth and its remaining colonies. Supreme Commander Zextel's face appeared, looking exactly as it had during first contact years ago. "People of Earth," the alien leader said, "your defiance ends today. But know that your story will be remembered. Future species will learn from your example. They will learn that resistance against the Empire brings only destruction." Morrison waited for the transmission to end. Then she opened a channel to her fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. You know what's at stake. You know what we're fighting for. The Zarkaks think they understand horror space. They think they've mastered it. Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we show them that humanity doesn't bow to tyranny. We adapt. We overcome. We survive." She paused, looking at the tactical display showing her small fleet hiding among the asteroids. "All ships, begin horror space drive sequence. Coordinates are locked. When we emerge, hit them hard and hit them fast. They won't be expecting us, but that advantage won't last long." Throughout the fleet, horror space drives hummed to life. Reality began to twist and bend around 150 ships. "Jump in 5 minutes," Morrison announced. "Give them hell." In his lab on Earth, Dr. Nash watched his monitors. The fleet's energy signatures were strong and stable. The improved drives were working perfectly. The shield modifications were holding. "Show them what humanity can do," he whispered. The countdown reached 0. 150 ships vanished into holes in reality, leaving normal space behind. The largest coordinated horror space jump in human history was underway. The Zarkaks were about to learn that humanity had turned their greatest weapon into something new, something they never expected. And billions of eyes watched, waiting to see what would emerge from those impossible holes in space. Lieutenant John Reynolds stood at his station aboard the flagship, monitoring the psychological warfare systems. Around him, the ship vibrated as it traveled through horror space. The impossible colors and twisted geometry outside the ship would have driven unprotected humans insane. But the crew remained calm, protected by their advanced shields. 30 seconds to emergence, the navigation officer announced. John checked his systems one last time. His job was crucial to Operation Nightmare's success. The modified horror space drives wouldn't just bring Earth's ships into battle. They would bring terror with them. "All ships report ready," Admiral Morrison said from her command chair. "Remember your training. What you're about to see might shock you, but stay focused." The countdown reached 0. Reality tore open in 150 different places around the Zarkax fleet. But these weren't the clean, precise exits the aliens were used to seeing. These were ragged wounds in space itself, leaking impossible energies and echoes of horror space into normal reality. John activated his systems. The modified shields began broadcasting the raw essence of horror space outward, amplifying the natural terror of their emergence. On the main screen, he watched Zarkax ships recoil from the holes in space. Their crews, never trained to handle raw horror space exposure, felt the full psychological impact of what humanity had created. "First wave, engage," Morrison ordered. Earth's ships shot out of the tiers in reality, trailing tendrils of horror space energy behind them like terrible caves. They looked less like ships and more like living nightmares, their metal surfaces seeming to shift and change as they moved. The Zarkax response was slow, confused. Their sensors couldn't properly track ships that existed partially in horror space. Their crews struggled to function as waves of terror washed over them. "Second wave, emerge and target their command ships," Morrison commanded. "Third wave, protect Earth from their weapon platforms." John watched his displays as more Earth ships appeared. The psychological impact was even stronger now. The Zarkax fleet, so perfectly arranged for their planned attack, began to break formation. "Ma'am," he reported, "enemy communications show signs of panic. They're calling us demons, horror spawn." Morrison nodded grimly. "Good. Let them fear us. Lieutenant Baker, status of enemy command ships." 3 confirmed hits. Susan Baker's voice came through the comm. "The Nightshade's horror space weapons are working better than expected. Their shields can't handle the dimensional disruption." The battle spread across space as more Earth ships engaged the enemy. Traditional weapons, missiles, energy beams, and railguns combined with horror space effects to create chaos among the Zarkax fleet. "Enemy ship attempting to flee," Tactical reported. "They're charging their horror space drives." "Not today," Morrison said. "Reynolds, show them what happens when they try to enter our domain." John activated the new defensive systems. As the Zarkax ship tried to enter horror space, it encountered something different. Humanity's modified version of that impossible dimension. The alien ship's drive exploded, unable to handle the altered physics Earth had created. "All ships, press the advantage," Morrison ordered. "Don't let them regroup." The battle continued for hours. Earth ships danced through space, appearing and disappearing through tiers in reality. Each emergence brought fresh waves of terror to the Zarkax crews. Their perfect formation had completely collapsed. Message from Dan Cooper. Communications announced. "Enemy commanders are calling for retreat. They say we've corrupted horror space itself." A laugh escaped Morrison's lips. "They haven't seen anything yet. All ships, prepare for Operation Nightmare's final phase." John's hands flew over his console, preparing the most powerful psychological warfare attack ever attempted. Every Earth ship would emerge from horror space simultaneously, surrounding the Zarkax command ships in a display of impossible physics and dimensional horror. "Enemy casualties at 30%, Tactical reported. "Their weapon platforms are offline. Earth is safe from their space-time trap." "Make ready," Morrison ordered. "All ships, synchronize horror space drives. Reynolds, maximum power to the perception amplifiers." The remaining Earth ships vanished into horror space, leaving the confused Zarkax fleet firing at shadows. For 30 seconds, space was almost normal again. Then it happened. 120 ships, their horror space drives modified far beyond alien understanding, emerged in perfect formation around the Zarkak's command fleet. The fabric of reality screamed. Colors that shouldn't exist painted space in impossible patterns. The very laws of physics seemed to bend. John watched his readings spike off the charts as the combined psychological impact hit the alien ships. The Zarkaks, who thought they had mastered horror space travel, faced the true horror of what humanity had done to their technology. Enemy ships are powering down, Tactical reported, voice filled with awe. They're surrendering. Message from Supreme Commander Zextal. Communication said. Text only. It says, what have you done to horror space? Morrison stood from her command chair. Send response. We made it ours. The battle wasn't completely over. Some Zarkak ships tried to fight on. Others attempted to flee. But their once mighty fleet was in ruins, their crews traumatized by exposure to humanity's version of horror space travel. John monitored the aftermath through his systems. The psychological impact would last for months, maybe years. The Zarkaks would never again feel safe in horror space, knowing that humans had changed it, had made it even more terrifying than before. Message from Earth. Communications announced. The Defense Council says, they say welcome home, humanity's champions. Morrison looked at her crew, pride evident in her eyes. Send word to all ships. Operation Nightmare is complete. Earth is safe. As the Earth fleet regrouped, John watched the Zarkak ships retreat. They didn't use horror space drives anymore. They fled through normal space, leaving behind their dreams of conquest and their assumptions about humanity's capabilities. Dr. Nash is hailing, communication said. Put him through, Morrison ordered. The scientist's tired face appeared on screen. He looked at the tactical display showing the retreating Zarkak's fleet, and a small smile crossed his face. It worked, he said simply. We did it. We turned their greatest weapon into their worst nightmare. Morrison nodded. We did more than that, old friend. We showed them that humanity doesn't just adapt to new technology. We make it our own. We improve it. And sometimes, she looked at the strange energies still swirling around Earth's ships. Sometimes we make it into something its creators never imagined possible. The day billions witnessed Earth's battle fleet emerge from horror space would be remembered throughout the galaxy, but not just as a victory. It would be remembered as the day humanity proved they could take the most terrifying force in space and make it even more terrifying. The day humanity became the new masters of horror space. 1 month after the Battle of Earth, Commander Alice Boyd stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned space station Unity. Below her, Earth shone like a blue jewel, but her attention was focused on something else, the gathering of ships in high orbit. The entire horror space fleet was assembling for the first time in public view. No more hiding in asteroid belts. No more secret tests. Today, humanity would show the galaxy exactly what they had created. Quite a sight, isn't it? Dr. Robert Nash said, joining her at the window. He looked older than when she'd last seen him, during that first terrible contact with the Zarkaks. Hard to believe these are the same ships we built in secret. Alice replied. They look different now. She was right. The horror space drives had changed the ships that carried them. The metal hulls seemed to shift slightly, like heat waves in the desert. Strange patterns of light played across their surfaces. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The drives are still evolving, Nash explained. Each jump through horror space changes them a little more. They're learning, adapting, becoming something new. Below them, Earth's billions watched through telescopes and video feeds. News stations broadcast live footage of the fleet. After years of hiding their true strength, humanity was finally ready to show its power. Representatives from 15 alien species are here to witness this, Nash continued. They want to see if the stories about the battle are true. Alice smiled. The stories had spread quickly through the galaxy. Tales of human ships emerging from nightmare tiers in space, of weapons that bent reality itself, of crews who could face the horrors of dimensional travel and emerge stronger. Admiral Morrison is hailing all ships, the station's speakers announced. Broadcast beginning. The Admiral's face appeared on screens throughout the station. She stood on her flagship's bridge, looking as commanding as ever. Today, we show the galaxy that humanity is ready to take its place among the stars, she began. Not as conquerors, like the Zarkax. Not as victims, as they intended us to be. But as pioneers. As innovators. As those who took the most terrifying force in space and made it our own. On cue, the fleet began to move. 150 ships, arranged in perfect formation. Their horror space drives hummed to life, making reality shiver around them. Watch closely, Nash told Alice. This is something new. Something we've been working on since the battle. The fleet didn't just vanish into horror space. Instead, the ships seemed to merge with it, becoming part of the boundary between normal space and that impossible dimension. Their hulls turned transparent, then reflective, showing glimpses of things that shouldn't exist. By the stars, Alice whispered. The fleet moved as one, trailing streams of exotic energy. Where the Zarkax had forced their way through horror space, humanity's ships danced with it. They weren't just traveling through another dimension. They were becoming part of it. In orbit around Mars, a target array waited. Old ships and satellites, arranged for this demonstration. The fleet approached at impossible speeds, their modified weapons ready. All ships, engage, Morrison ordered. What followed wasn't just a display of firepower. It was a demonstration of humanity's mastery over horror space itself. Ships phased in and out of reality, firing weapons that twisted space around their targets. Metal didn't just melt or explode, it transformed, folded in on itself, became something else entirely. The alien observers watched in stunned silence. Their sensors tried to make sense of what they were seeing, but humanity's technology had moved beyond normal understanding. Message from the Galactic Council. Communications announced. They're offering Earth immediate membership, full voting rights, access to all technological databases. Nash laughed softly. A month ago, they wouldn't even talk to us. Funny how things change. The demonstration continued. Earth's fleet showed maneuvers that should have been impossible. Ships emerged from horror space, seemingly inside each other, their modified shields allowing them to occupy the same space momentarily. Others created controlled tiers in reality, using them as weapons and shields at the same time. Final phase, Morrison announced. Show them the thunder. The fleet regrouped into a sphere formation. Horror space drives powered up to maximum. Reality held its breath. Then it happened. 150 ships entered horror space simultaneously, but differently than before. They didn't create individual tiers. Instead, they turned the space around them into something new, a perfect blend of normal space and that impossible dimension. For a moment, everyone watching saw what the ship's crews saw. Colors that shouldn't exist. Geometries that hurt to look at. The true face of horror space, tamed and controlled by human technology. The fleet emerged over Earth, their modified drives creating a display that would be remembered for centuries. It wasn't just impressive. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. Humanity had taken the horror out of horror space and turned it into art. The Zarkax are requesting peace talks, communications reported. They're offering reparations, and they want to know if we're willing to teach them our horror space techniques. Morrison's response was quick. Tell them we'll discuss peace, but our technology remains ours. As the fleet powered down their drives, Alice turned to Nash. Did you ever imagine this, when you first saw those engine signatures during first contact? Nash shook his head. I thought we might find a way to copy their technology, to survive. Instead, he gestured at the ships, their hulls still shimmering with impossible energies. Instead, we surpassed them. We took their greatest weapon and turned it into something greater. And now, Alice asked, what do we do with this power? We explore, Nash replied simply. There are places even the Zarkax never dared to go. Regions of space they thought were too dangerous to travel through. But us? He smiled. We're humanity. We don't just face the unknown. We reshape it. Below them, Earth celebrated. The fleet began its victory patrol, showing every nation a display of their newfound power. Humanity had faced extinction and emerged stronger. They had looked into the heart of horror space and made it their own. The day billions witnessed Earth's battle fleet emerge from horror space became more than just a victory celebration. It became a declaration to the galaxy. Humanity was here to stay. They had mastered the impossible, tamed the untamable, and they were just getting started.